Grief is not weakness. Grief is love, really with nowhere to go. And I want you to hear that because you have probably spent your whole life believing something else about grief, that it is a phase you move through and finish, or that it has stages that you check off, that there's a timeline. And if you're still crying about it after the timeline says you should be over it, there's something wrong with you. There is no timeline. There is no definition that fits everyone, and your feelings, whatever they are, however messy, however long they last, however small the loss looks from the outside, your feelings are fucking valid. And grief doesn't just show up at funerals. It shows up in 1,000 smaller forms you never were taught to name. And it shows up in the biggest, most devastating form there is, the kind some of the people I love most have had to survive. And in both of those, in the small, quiet griefs and the ones that break a person open completely, there's a decision sitting underneath the pain that changes everything about what happens next. Hey, you guys, welcome to Listen Bitch Podcast. If you're new here, I am Brandon Lynette. I am the author. Can I talk today? Of Once Upon a Time, Bitches. That is on Audible right now, you guys. I have the last book of the series of Once Upon a Time, Bitches, Fuck Luck, Bitches. The last series sitting on my computer right now, just sitting and aging. And this is the goal I've set for myself. If I can get up to 100 written reviews of Once Upon a Time Bitches, and if I can get up to 50 written reviews on Amazon of Fuck Luck Bitches, that's when I release the book. So I really want to just do justice with the first two. I feel like it's going to make the third book make a lot more sense. And you kind of see the progression of growth and you get to see the real life time change. And it kind of will just present where we are and what's the next step for who we're becoming. So those are available. The links to the books are in the show notes. You guys know I am the Voice Authority podcast coach. Your mess is your message. Your potential is your purpose. And I really genuinely just want you to get the fuck over yourself and go build something. And I want to talk about grief today in a way that doesn't rush you or shame you. We're not going to give you the 5 bullshit stages and tell you to move through them on a timed schedule. Click, click, click. I want to talk about the grief that nobody names because there is that everyday kind. And I want to talk about the grief that's too big for words, the kind I've watched people I love carry and somehow keep walking with because both of those are real and both of those discoveries of grief deserve to be spoken about honestly. Before we go too far today, today's episode is brought to you by my favorite product, Super Patch, Peace Patch today. I do wear one every single day. This is my foundational staple. There are days when I'm in a rush and I don't get as many stickers on as I'd like. Maybe my lotion's not dry. It's not going to stick to my skin, whatever the reason is. Peace is definitely my go-to. I keep one in like every room. And that's because grief lives in the body, not just the mind. And your nervous system needs support while it holds something that can be this heavy. Peace supports the stress relief and the calm. This is all drug free, zero ingredients, made in the USA, vibrotactile technology working directly through your nervous system. And I have the link in the show notes. Okay. Um, I know, have you guys heard that before? That grief is just love with nowhere to go? Because I've heard it a lot. And I think it's the definition that I actually believe. Grief is love that no longer has a place to jump to the way it used to. Like you loved something, a person or a version of your child, a season of your life, a relationship, a future you had planned out in your head. And that thing is gone, or it changed shape, or it moved beyond your reach, and all the love you had for it is still like fully alive inside you, and now it has nowhere to go. It can't jump to the thing it was with anymore because that thing isn't there in the same form it used to be. So the love just sits in your chest and it's heavy and it's aching and it's looking for somewhere to put itself. But that ache is grief. Um, it's wild how just even talking about this today, you guys, is already making me emotional because when I talk about grief, there's so much that comes up. There is so much that comes up. And that is why grief hurts as much as it does. It is not an abstract sadness. It is love. It is real love, the actual thing, suddenly homeless. And you can't make homeless love disappear by being strong about it or moving on quickly or just pretending that shit doesn't exist. It has to find somewhere to go. And that's the whole work of grieving. not getting over the loss, finding somewhere for the love to land now that its original home is gone. And there's a grief that nobody really talks about. And most of the grief you will carry in your life, it never gets a funeral, right? It doesn't get a card, it doesn't get a casserole from the neighbors or permission from anyone to actually feel it. It just shows up quietly, and you don't even recognize it as grief because you've been taught grief only counts when someone dies. Like I'm grieving my son right now, and it's nothing tragic happened to him. He's growing up, he's becoming a man. And the little boy version of him, the one who needed me in a certain way, who, good Lord, who fit in my arms a certain way, who is not coming back ever, no matter how much I love the man he's becoming. That little boy is gone forever, and that is a real loss. Nobody sends flowers for that. Nobody's asking me, like, hey, are you okay? But this is still like so much love with nowhere to go because that specific little boy doesn't exist anymore. And I'm allowed to grieve him, even while I'm proud of and in love with the man standing in his place. I'm getting, these letters, and I'm seeing the growth in him, and I'm watching his experience in the Marine boot camp, and I just am in awe, but I still have that heavy grief. And you guys, I have three kids left at home out of six, and I'm currently, missing my son in his own transition. I just got over his girls going through their transition a year ago. And so he's in his own becoming, and even that, even someone simply growing and shifting and needing me less in this season is its own quiet grief. Like watching your children leave the exact shape they used to be in is grief. Maybe watching a friendship change is grief. Watching a dream shift into something different than what you originally pictured is grief. Watching your body change, your role change, a season of your life end. I grieve that I will never carry a baby in my body again. I grieve that I will never nurse another baby, that I will never have that experience. I grieve that. And at the same time, I can be grateful that my body carried and birthed and fed six kids, six beautiful, healthy kids. But all of this is love with nowhere to go, and none of it requires death to count as real. You don't need permission to call your losses grief. You have permission right now from me, and honestly, you really never needed it, not even from me, because your feelings were always valid, whether or not someone gave you the vocabulary to name them. But there is another kind of grief. There really is. And I want to speak to that grief too. It's not quiet and it's not small. And I've watched people I love carry it. And I'm not going to talk around it or make this episode pretend that, all grief is the same size. I have friends who have buried their children. That sentence should never have to exist in the English language, and it does. And I've sat with people carrying exactly that. There's no framework that makes that make sense. There's no timeline where that grief revolves on schedule. There's no version of me that would ever tell someone in that pain to hurry up, to get over it, or go find the silver lining faster. Some grief does not get smaller. It just gets carried differently as time passes, but it doesn't disappear, and it shouldn't have to. And I'm not putting the little griefs and the catastrophic ones on the same shelf and saying this is all equal because they're not equal. What I am saying is that both are very real and both are love with with nowhere to go, and both deserve honesty instead of a forced timeline. The size of the loss determines how heavy the love is. That's the truth. And it does not determine whether the grief is valid. A grief that takes you a week to move through and a grief that reshapes the rest of someone's life, those are both grief, and neither one gets to be judged against the other's timeline. And this episode, I planned on recording yesterday. And so I've had it planned. I try a week or two in advance to write the topic in my calendar that I haven't talked about or, that has been in topics of conversation. And it's wild to me because that night, the night before yesterday, I just come home from a memorial. I have known my friend Eddie for almost 15 years. I stood in a room 2 nights ago full of people, a few small towns together worth of people, watching his family receive an outpouring of love for a man who was a year younger than me. And none of it makes sense. And it shouldn't have to make sense because some things are not supposed to add up. Why the good die young is not a question with an answer. It's just a wound that you carry while you keep living. But I watched his family that night and I saw the truth underneath the flowers, the full room, the tears. Everyone shows up for the goodbye. Everyone. The room is packed for the party of grief. The one moment where the relationship gets validated out loud, where people say what Eddie meant to them. They get to say what role he played in their lives. And, everything gets spoken and honored all at once together in a loud, beautiful room. And his dad said to me a couple times that night, he was just tickled. He's just tickled pink about how much everybody loved him and to get to see that. I know the other side of that. I know what's coming for that family because I've watched it before. It gets quiet. It gets very quiet very fast because the room empties, the boxes of food disappear. The people who filled the room tonight go back to their own lives, and Eddie's family is left with all the firsts, like the first birthday without him, which was 2 days after his passing, the first holiday, Christmas is around the corner, the first ordinary Tuesday, where the silence just lands different than it ever has before. And most of the world will have moved on by then. That's the gap. That's where the real grief work actually happens, long after the room is emptied and nobody's checking anymore. And I got to meet more of his family tonight. Like, I've loved his dad for a long time. Small town. He actually was my husband's teacher, and he loved my husband too. I think that's great. So meeting my friend Eddie's sisters that night, my heart was just full, even inside the grief. And I know something about this family already. They're not the kind of people that will ask for help. You can tell. Most people in the middle of a loss like this never do. So the tribute that actually matters is not attending the one big room. It's showing up quietly afterwards in the gap without being asked, not saying, let me know if you need anything. And this is probably true for a lot of families. If you know someone that has lost someone, it's not about saying like, tell me what you need. It puts the burden back on a grieving person to identify their need and ask a stranger to meet it. Say instead, I made extra food this week. I'm dropping it off Tuesday. Does that work with everything going on? Saying I can check on so and so's dog this week, make sure, stuff is actually where it should be, things are happening. Just small, specific, unasked for needs. That is what actually carries a grieving family through the quiet part of this. And I feel like the gap that Eddie left behind is already palpable across like all of Southwest Michigan right now. And you can feel it. The day the news came, you can just feel like this hollow echo, just something not right in the air. There is an ache of a beautiful spirit being fully known in heaven right now, while the rest of us down here are stuck in the shock of disbelief, just missing the hell out of him. And the ache doesn't resolve on a timeline either. It just gets carried differently by everyone who loved him for the rest of their lives. Um, and the thing is with grief, you guys, it's easy for me to talk about Eddie, but there's a lot of Eddies, and there's a lot of you that have lost a lot of Eddies in your lifetime, and there's a lot of you that are possibly currently going through something like this right now. I need you to understand grief is not only emotional, it lives physically in your nervous system, and understanding that helps take some of the shame people feel about how long or how hard it hits them. Uh, and I quit defending myself a long time ago. It's like my family just knows who I am. They know I'm going to cry for no random reason. Um, no specific reason, just, I see a picture or I have a memory or, walking into the room and my kids all just look and feel different. I don't apologize anymore because all of that is the core in me of just so many things that I grieve with the process. Being a parent is incredibly hard. And it's just that reality of like the babies are growing, they're moving on, but grief is activating the same neural pathways as physical pain. This happens. Studies on this are very consistent. You have to take my word for it. The brain processes the pain of loss through overlapping regions with actual physical injury, which is why grief can genuinely make your body ache and it makes your chest feel tight and it makes your whole system feel exhausted in a way that it doesn't have anything to do with how much you sleep or how well the sleep was. It's not dramatic. Your brain is registering real pain because to your nervous system, losing something or someone you love this deeply is not metaphorical. It is an injury. And grief disrupts your nervous system's baseline regulation. The attachment you had to the person or the version of your life that's gone, neurologically, a source of safety and predictability. When that attachment is severed or changed, your nervous system loses a reference point it had been using to regulate itself. That's part of why grief can produce waves of anxiety or disorientation or exhaustion, and it seems to come out of nowhere. Your body's recalibrating around an absence, and recalibration takes real time and real energy, no matter what a 5 step framework tries to promise you. And that's knowing that has made me not feel so guilty for the big changes that have come in waves in my life. And what matters most neurologically, honestly, is that grief that is suppressed, it doesn't disappear. It's just getting stored. And stored grief will always surface later in ways that are harder to trace back to the original loss. And it shows up in things like anxiety, irritability, or physical tension, just a general heaviness that people can't explain. Grief that is actually felt and expressed and given somewhere to go, it processes differently. It moves through the nervous system instead of lodging in it. This is not about rushing the feeling. It is about not blocking it, because blocked grief costs you more in the long run than felt grief ever will. If you guys think about a river that used to flow into a lake, and then the lake just dries up. The river doesn't stop. The water's still there. It's still moving. It's still real, and it needs somewhere to go. If it has nowhere, what happens? It floods. It backs up. It finds the wrong low ground and pulls up somewhere that was never meant to be. So it's causing damage in a place that had nothing to do with the original lake. But if the river is given a new channel, dug carefully and on purpose, the exact same water that used to flow into the lake can flow into something else entirely and become useful, become beautiful, become the thing that waters an entirely new field. Your grief is that river. The love you had for what is gone didn't stop flowing just because the destination disappeared. If you give it nowhere to go, it floods your life in ways that seem unrelated to the original loss. It shows up as anger, numbness, distance from people who had nothing to do with it. But if you actually dig the channel, if you find somewhere real for that love to flow, the same water that used to flow into a person or a season of your life, or the version of your life that is gone, it can flow into something new. It could water something. It doesn't have to just flood. You're not required to stop the river. I'm just saying, accept the invitation to dig a new channel. And I know one of the hardest things, because underneath every grief, eventually, there's a decision. Not a decision about whether to grieve. You do not get to opt out of that. The loss happened and the love is real and the grieving isn't optional. The decision is about what you do with the love once it has nowhere to go. You can let it flood and pool and cause damage in places that had nothing to do with the original loss, or you can dig it a channel on purpose and let it become something that grows. I talked with I had this guy on my show that I interviewed who had lost his son, and there's no sentence that follows that fact that makes it smaller. And instead of letting that love have nowhere to go forever, he built one of the largest fundraisers in his community in his son's name, using every ounce of that love that used to flow into the little boy who's not here anymore and pointing it somewhere new. His son's name is spoken every single year, all year, because he's making calls to book events because of what that man built out of the worst thing that ever happened to him. And that's not him getting over his son. That's him refusing to let the love that belonged to his son disappear. He gave the river a channel, and it's watering an entire community now every single year permanently because of a decision he made in the middle of the worst grief a parent can carry. And I'm doing my own small version of this now. I'm grieving my son becoming a man, and I've made a decision about it. I'm working on myself right now in the middle of this grief, this specific grief, so that when I see him on the other side of his own transition, whatever that looks like, I'm a better version of myself, someone worth him coming home to. And that's what I'm doing with my river. That's the channel I'm digging. Your loss can become the exact place your greatest potential grows from. And it's not because the loss was good. It wasn't. Loss is never good, but it's because love that has nowhere to go is still love. And love is powerful enough to build something if you decide to let it. And I see this in you. I see you carrying some grief right now, and you've never once called it grief because it didn't look like the kind of grief that gets permission. You're grieving a friendship that faded, or a version of your life you thought you'd be living by now, or maybe a child that's grown up too fast, a dream that shifted into something unrecognizable. I see the love still sitting in your chest with nowhere to go, and I see you calling it something else: sadness, stress, depression, being off, anything but grief, because you never felt like you could name it that. and I see someone who has more capacity in yourself than you know exactly what to do with it, to do what the Father did, to take the love that has nowhere to go and build something out of it on purpose. You don't have to wait for this grief to disappear before you decide what to do with it. You can decide right now in the very messy middle of it. Exactly like what I'm doing with my own son. The river doesn't have to finish flowing before you start digging the channel. You can dig while the water's still moving. If you know someone carrying a grief that they've never had permission to name, I want you to send them this episode. And if that person is you, then this is your permission right now, today. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast, leave a written review. You guys know Jesus wept. 2 words. It's the shortest verse in the entire Bible. Jesus wept. But it is one of the most important. He was standing at the tomb of Lazarus, a man he loved, a man he knew was about to raise from the dead in a matter of minutes. He already knew the ending. He knew Lazarus was about to walk out of the tomb alive, and he wept anyway. The Son of God, with full knowledge that the resurrection was seconds away, still let himself feel the full weight of loss in the moment. He didn't skip the grief because he knew the outcome. He didn't rush past it because the joy was coming. He stood there and he let the love that had nowhere to go in the exact moment be exactly what it was. That's grief. Real, full, unhurried grief, even with the miracle already on the way. If Jesus, knowing the resurrection was seconds away, still wept, don't you see that you're allowed to grieve fully even when you know or hope or trust that something good is coming on the other side of your loss? Knowing there's a resurrection coming that doesn't cancel the tomb, you are allowed to stand at your own tomb and weep exactly as long and exactly as hard as you need to before you ever have to think about what comes next. I want you to name this. If you've been calling a real loss something smaller, sadness, stress, being off, I want you just to call it grief. The naming itself gives the love somewhere to start going. Let the timeline be yours. Stop measuring your grief against anyone else's calendar, including your own past expectation of how long you thought this should take. There is no schedule. There's never been one. And then show up in the gap. If you know someone grieving right now, don't wait for the funeral crowd to thin before you disappear along with it. You know what I'm talking about. The room is full today, but it's going to be quiet soon, and that quiet is where the real support has to live. Don't ask what they need. Tell them what you're already doing. I made extra food. I'm dropping it off Tuesday. I could pick up a prescription this week. Just small, specific, unrequested. Think about them for the holidays. Tell them a funny story on their loved one's birthday. Tell them you're thinking of them for Christmas. It doesn't even have to be specific. Just let them feel seen and heard and know that someone acknowledges they have a hole in their hearts this season. That stuff is the tribute that actually matters long after the funeral flowers die. And when you're ready, not before, dig the channel. Ask what the love that has nowhere to go could build instead. Not to rush past the grief, but to eventually give it a place to flow that turns the worst thing that happened to you into the place your greatest potential begins. Grief is not weakness. It never was. It is love, the real, actual thing, suddenly without a place to land. And the ache of that is not a flaw in you. It is proof of how much you loved in the first place. You are allowed to grieve the small things nobody gave you permission to grieve. The version of your child who grew up, the dream that shifted shape, the friendship that quietly ended. And if your grief is the kind that reshapes an entire life, the kind some of the people I love most have had to carry, you're allowed to carry it exactly as long and exactly as heavily and exactly actually how much it weighs with no one, including me, rushing you toward a finish line that doesn't exist. And underneath all of that, whenever you're ready, there is a decision that's waiting. And it's not whether you feel the loss, you already do. The decision is what you do with the love once it has nowhere else to go. You can let it flood or you can dig it a channel and let it build something that outlives the pain that created it. The way that the father on my show did. The way I'm trying to do now with my own son, becoming someone better on the other side of this grief so that when I see him again, he comes home to a version of me worth coming home to. Your loss doesn't have to be wasted. It can become the exact place your greatest potential grows from. And it's not because the loss was good. Don't ever think that. It's because love was that powerful. It just never disappears. It needs somewhere new to go. Saying goodbye to friends, that's grief. Knowing Eddie 15 years. And if you take one thing from this episode and let it be practical instead of just emotional, let it be this. Go check on someone in the quiet part. The part after the room empties, the part nobody else remembers to show up for. Don't ask if they need anything, just bring the food. Just bring the food. Just be there on an ordinary Tuesday 6 weeks from now when nobody else is. And Eddie, oh, my friend, if any part of you can hear this, you were loved incredibly by so many people. And I hope you still got to see that. And I hope you know that there are so many people that are going to have to figure out where that love goes now. Um, but rest easy. I did see a lot of people that love your family as well, so they're in good hands. Okay. For you guys listening, check the show notes for everything you need. And I'll see you guys tomorrow.